Good afternoon, knife nerds. Today we have a pretty awesome head-to-head comparison here of the Something Obscene company J-Cape. This is a version 3 and this is a version 3.5. The version 3 was lent into the channel by a knife bro by the name of Mr. Frank, and he got this freaking awesome J-Cape 3.0, and of course the 3.5 is mine. And so what I wanted to do is do a pretty thorough examination of both knives and compare and contrast the differences of the two different knives, because if you did not know, these are actually manufactured by two different companies. So the 3.0 was the last run of the J-Cape that was produced by We Knife Company. And after that, when they went to the 3.5, Something Obscene switched to using Reate to produce the J-Cape. And so what we have here is kind of the two biggest, in my mind, the two biggest titans in the production knife industry at the moment. We Knives and Reate are extremely prolific companies today, manufacturing tons of knives, in collaboration with some of the best makers on the planet, or makers and knife designers on the planet. So, this is a pretty interesting comparison for me, because not only do we have the same knife made by two different manufacturers, but we also have a thumb stud version and we have a flipper version. And so we're going to do a pretty thorough examination here. And Mr. Frank sent this in to me to check out and get a fresh edge put on it for him. And we've got a just nasty mirrored edge I did here, and hopefully he's going to love that. It is stupid, scary, razor sharp. I have not sharpened mine because this one is more or less a safe queen. I do carry this knife from time to time, but I don't use it for anything hard. But I do have another J-Cape 3.5 coming in the mail sometime this month, and that's going to be my user. And so this one is just kind of a safe queen, for lack of a better word. Now, the first thing I want to take a look at really is the hardware, because it was a very obvious difference as soon as I got them. There is a pretty distinct difference between at least the body screws. So on the 3.5, these screws have slightly domed heads on them, okay? And they are a T8. Okay, so this is my T8, and that fits into the body screw on the 3.5 there. And on the We manufactured version, these are totally flat and kind of flush with the scales, and they are a T6 body screw. Pretty big difference there, in contrast, going from a T6, flathead, to a domed T8. And so that's the first major difference that I noticed. Aside from that, both of the pivots are T8. Let me double check that. Both pivots are T8. And you know what? When I actually think that the We pivot has a slightly deeper and a slightly tighter fitment to my Weha T8 bit here. So yeah, that's just a little thing of noteworthiness there. They are very similarly chamfered around the edges with a 45-degree bevel all the way around, but the edges are slightly less knocked down and more refined on the edge of the chamfers on the 3.5. These are a little more rounded, and I would assume that's because this has been tumbled. It has been stone washed. So when you stone wash, it's going to, you know, kind of knock down those corners a little bit. So they're a little bit rounder and smoother on the Wii. Now on the pocket clip here, the first thing that I do know for sure, because I have heard this from the man Felix himself, is that these pocket clips are not compatible. You cannot swap them from a V3 to a V3.5, and you can actually see, I think it's pretty obvious here, that the Wii screws are a little closer, just slightly closer together than the Reate screws. So just a slight bit of difference in the screw pattern there on the clips, and so that was a pretty, you know, stark contrast there. Now let's get the blades opened up here, and I think this is probably where, you know, we'll see a pretty dramatic difference between the Wii and the Reate. I think that the bevel on the tip here, this flat bevel on the compound grind, I think that the bevel is just a little hair fatter than on the Reate than it is on the Wii. And as far as the blade stock thickness, I do not have my calipers handy, but I would almost assume that the Reate may be a little bit thicker. I could be wrong about that. I may grab my calipers here in a minute and check that. So I think that the grind is just a little bit hair different there. And to me, it actually kind of feels like the Reate, or the Wii knife, may be slightly thinner behind the edge than the Reate. Again, that's something I could check with my caliper real quick if I grab those. So obviously we have the difference of this one being a flipper and this one being a thumb stud, but there's a pretty dramatic difference here in the plunge grind. So as you can see, that on the Reate, this plunge grind sweeps kind of straight up and then shoulders out really abruptly, whereas on the Wii, this goes at more of an angle like so, and then has a more gradual shoulder there. You can kind of see that difference there in the plunge grind. So that's a pretty interesting difference there. The jimping, very, very similar. I think the Wii produced knife has slightly wider bevels on the sides. They both feel grippy, they both feel really good, but the Wii is definitely more rounded off with less traction than the Reate. The Reate has a ton of traction here, and it's just a really, really nice, you know, good kind of traction. It's not sharp to where it's like, you know, uncomfortable to use, but it gives more traction than the Wii does. So very stark contrast there. The swedge is very, very similar on both knives. I'm not seeing a big noticeable difference right away there. And of course the blade shape overall is very similar, but I do believe that the hollow grind on the Reate is a little bit deeper through here. It just feels hollower through here, okay, which is interesting because, like I said, I think the Wii actually feels a little thinner behind the edge, but I think you can kind of tell that, you know, the grind, like this is a, you know, this little plunge right here is slightly more rounded on the Wii than it is on the Reate. It's a little bit more kind of pointed on the Reate. And so you know, two different grinding techniques there on the blade, and that would also kind of explain the difference between the plunge grind there. So you know, I think the Reate is a little more hollow ground than the Wii, but the Wii is thinner behind the edge. I'm going to try to, confirm that with my calipers before we hang this video up today, but it does feel that way to me. And so let's take a look here at the jimping that is on the lock face. And so I think that these two are nearly identical. I don't see any dynamic contrast there. Both of those, jimpings on the lock bar there are very similar. And as well on the lock side of the knife, we're looking pretty similar with the lock bar insert placement and the shape of the cutout there, very similar. However, obviously Reate used the T8 screws while we used the T6 screws, so there's just a little tad bit of difference there, but I think the placement is basically bang on similar in both instances. And on the back spacer, again, very close. And so the Wii jimping here is very sharp, very aggressive. It's less so, it's a little bit more knocked down and smoother on the Reate. So that's a little bit different than how the jimping was on the blade. This is very sharp on the Wii. I can totally feel a big difference there. And so smoother around all the edges on the Reate on the back spacer itself. Then of course there's the finish. I do believe here that Reate just did like a, I don't know if it's bead blasted. If it is bead blasted, it feels very fine. It may not be blasted at all before they did this flame finish. And Wii has this totally awesome bronze anodized stone wash, kind of rough washed finish that they do so well. I am going to disassemble Frank's knife here today, and we're going to kind of take a look at the insides, and so we can see the differences inside the knife, because there are some pretty dramatic differences inside the knife. And when I do that, I'm going to take some Windex and clean this so you can see what this bronze really looks like without finger oils all over it, because man, Wii does a beautiful rough stone washed bronze finish, and they've done it a lot on the Ferrum Forge knives that they've done and stuff. And I just always loved this particular finish that Wii does, so we're going to check that out too. Now let me take a look at the stop pins real quick before I get moving on to this. And we're looking at the Reate stop pin here, and we're looking at the Wii stop pin here. And I think, let me see, I think the Wii stop pin may be a little bit thicker. I'll try to confirm that once I have them disassembled, but they look the same distance back from the blade, and the blade shape along the stop there is pretty much nearly identical. So yeah, the lock faces do look very similar, but they may have a slight difference. We'll check that out when we get them opened up. So I have not taken Frank's knife apart yet, so I do not know if there is Loctite on this. We're going to go ahead and find out, and if there is, I may have to heat up the pivot and break that Loctite free. So we've got a T8 on the pivot here. It is Loctited, but it's not, unless it's spinning on me, it doesn't seem super hard to remove, so that's a good thing. It is coming off, and it's starting to bind more now. Get my ratchet here, that might do the trick. So we're just going to put a ratchet on here to back up this pivot so it doesn't free spin. And that's coming off relatively easy. Oh, it looks like the pivot's coming out of the show side here rather than on the lock side. So I may have to do some re-Loctiting on his pivot on at least one side. Depends on if he prefers it to be fully Loctited or not. But it is coming out of the show side since it is a free spinning pivot and both sides are threaded. And so we'll go ahead and take it apart from the lock side. Remove our two T6 body screws here. Looks like also free spinning on the body screws. That one came out easily. These were pretty much both Loctited, I do believe, all the body screws and stuff. So this knife may have never been taken apart previously. I may be de-virginizing Frank's knife here. And yep, that puppy came out a little funky. Okay, so we've got that apart. Now we do have our hardened race washers here. And our caged bearings. Those actually don't look like 5mm. Those look like larger bearings. I'm gonna have to check that out. Let me see. So I'll pick this up, and as with all the J-Capes, as far as I'm aware, there is no detent ramp. And this is M390, whereas on the Reate it is 20 CV. So that's another change from the 3 to the 3.5. I just love this thumb stud. I'm gonna get me another J-Cape with a thumb stud. I love the flipper too. They're both amazing in their own ways, and it's totally worth having both versions of the knife. I know that sounds a little fanboyish, but you know, sue me. I am a huge fanboy of the J-Cape for sure. You can see how the pivot kind of separated from the screw a little bit there on that. So that's going to be a thing that I'll have to fix up when I reassemble Frank's knife here. And we're going to pull the stop pin, kind of inspect that. These are not, I was expecting 5mm bearings in the Wii knife, but I don't think they are. These look like 1/4 inch to me. And Frank did send some 5mm skiffs, whoops, with his knife here. So, you know, we'll be able to see right away. Those are not the same size. The pivot is large, and since it's Wii, I'm going to assume it's a 6mm size. So Frank's 5mm are not going to work here. We're going to look in my little bearing bag here and see if I've got some bearings that will swap into Frank's knife. And yeah, so we're getting all our hardware off of here. She came apart a little bit odd because there was the original Loctite was still present on the knife. And so one standoff came out of one side, one standoff came out of the other side. A little bit odd, but we'll fix that. Get both standoffs off of there. Both race washers. Okay, so now that we have Frank's knife apart, man, I just love this black PVD coating that Wii Knives does. Very awesome stuff. And they did that black PVD coating on both the clip and the back spacer here. And we're going to kind of keep this hardware separated and organized. In the meantime, I don't want to put this too far off screen here, so we're going to get like that. Now we're going to take apart the Reate. So I do believe I have already broken the Loctite free on mine. I did about a week ago. I kind of retuned mine, and so that should be fairly easy. I've got a T8 all the way around. It's nice to not have to switch bit sizes. That was a very wise decision from Something Obscene to have Reate use T8 body screws instead of the T6. Plus the T8s are a little bit beefier. They're a lot harder to strip out. And now we start to see the huge difference because the Reate is completely milled out inside and the Wii is not milled at all. And so this is a weight reduction thing that Reate does. Wii almost never mills the interior of their scales, and I don't know why they don't do that. It's just a thing that they don't do. And I think that's a mistake on their part. I'm not sure of any Wii knife that I've ever had that was milled on the inside. Maybe there has been some, maybe there hasn't, but I cannot recall taking apart a Wii knife that was, a Wii manufactured knife at all that was milled on the inside for weight reduction. I don't think it's ever happened. The scales are the same thickness, and you can see that the pockets that Reate has milled here are just insanely deep. I mean, that's like over 1/8 of an inch deep, and so it's a massive amount of weight reduction. Unfortunately, my cheap ass has not invested in a digital scale yet, but I can tell you from experience that holding both of them in hand, I think that the Reate produced J-Cape is about 4.5-ish ounces, somewhere around there, and the Wii produced knife is about 6 ounces. So there is a big difference in weight. You're talking 1 to 1.5 ounces of weight difference between the two. And that's just my guesstimation, okay? The back spacers, very similar, but a slight difference. Reate has like a little bit of a hook on the end here, whereas the Wii is just completely rounded off. If we kind of line them up, they're very similar on most of the specifications there until you get to here, and you'll see that Reate has extended the back spacer a little bit further to close off that, the back of the knife there a little bit more. So pretty big difference there. You can see there's a large difference in the standoffs because this uses T8s, this is T6s. And let's do a comparison of that stop pin real quick because it looked to me like the Wii was thicker. Nope, they are identical. Okay, I was imagining that. So I have skiff bearings in my J-Cape, and what I know for a fact, these are 1/4 inch skiff bearings. So we're going to take and do a little comparison here, and they are pretty much identical size. So I do believe the 1/4 inch skiffs will work in this Wii manufactured J-Cape as well. So that's something I didn't know. I thought Wii always used 5mm in all their knives. Every one I've disassembled, they had 5mm bearings in their knives. So that's pretty interesting to me, man. I did not know that. I didn't know that they had used 1/4 inch on the 3.0 J-Capes. So pretty cool. Let's see how that fits. It's a little loose here on the Wii pivot. A little bit loose to me. Now let's see how it fits on the Reate pivot. We might have a slight size difference there. Yeah, a little loose on the Reate pivot too. They might be the same size. Let's go ahead and compare them head to head. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say categorically the pivot is pretty much identical size on both J-Capes. Okay, so let me make sure that this 1/4" bearing is going to fit in the pocket. Boom, fits like a glove. And so Frank, 1/4" skiff bearings will fit into your J-Cape. I happen to have a spare set, and I'm going to go ahead and install them for you, and you can you know, just send me more knives to review in the future. We'll call it even, man. Okay, so let's take a look at the blade here, because you know, thumb stud versus flipper, there's a slight difference there. You know, I don't have a flipper J-Cape here to compare, but yeah, so just a slight difference there because the flipper, you know, knocks in against that stop pin there, so just a little bit of difference there. And as far as the blade height, seems pretty similar. The placement of the pivot hole seems pretty similar. However, I will say that the detent hole is much smaller on the Reate blade. It's a pretty large detent hole on the Wii blade, and that's interesting because they're the same size ball. You know, they're using a standard 1/16" ceramic ball on both of them. So it's interesting that Wii does a much larger hole for their detent. And yeah, oh well, maybe not. Maybe if I flip it over, duh. Okay, yeah, they're the same size. I'm slow, guys, my bad. Scratch that last part. I'm just gonna edit that out. I'm too lazy to edit that out. Okay, so very similar with subtle differences. There are some more chamfers. You know, we got nice 45 chamfer here on that little grind, and yeah, there's a bit of a chamfer there, but it's less pronounced. Oh well, I guess I see one dramatic difference here that I just wasn't even paying attention to. The pockets, the bearing pockets, are milled into the blade on the Reate, and they are not milled into the blade at all on the Wii. There's no pocket milled into the blade here at all. The pockets are just milled deeper into the scales here, whereas on the Reate, I would imagine they use maybe a slightly thinner race washer there, and so yeah, so that actually the washer meets up almost flush with the scale here on the Reate, and then the washer on the Wii is probably more inset. Let's check that out. Yeah, there's a big difference in depth there. The washer is set way deeper into the Wii scale. So yeah, interesting, very interesting. So I gotta say, I do prefer the pockets milled into the blade. Why, I don't know. I just prefer the pockets milled into the blade than rather than not having this here, no pocket there at all. So, you know, logos essentially are pretty similar, although I think I have a slight printer defect on mine, because that little, you know, steel logo there that says CPM 20CV kind of runs over my plunge line a little bit, and it's a little bit cleaner on the Wii knife here, a little bit straighter with the plunge line there. And so the lock bar inserts nearly identical in shape, so interesting. They didn't change much there at all that I can see at first glance. And, man, this is super interesting. I didn't expect to see this many differences in the design, but there is quite a lot going on here. And yeah, so very happy to be able to provide this video, because, you know, there isn't a lot of information out there on the differences between the V3 and the V3.5. So pretty cool to be able to do this. Thanks for sending in your 3.0 there, Mr. Frank. And other than that, I guess we're going to wrap it up and call it a video. You guys have a great rest of